Sure. Welcome back, and now let us start our work on Chapter 11 of our CA Foundation course, where the focus is on writing emails. In case you're watching the recorded session, please do not forget to watch Chapter 10 before coming over to this, because that is where we talked about the basics of letter writing. Now, email fundamentally is a letter. But that said, yes, there is a difference. And this session will more or less accommodate those differences here, and will build upon whatever is there in Chapter 10. So I will do my best to help you recall what we did there, whatever is relevant from that session, but you'd still gain a lot if you go through that particular session first. So there you go. Number one, what's an email? It's just like a letter. So what did we learn about letter? Letter was a piece of communication, can be formal or informal, and we use it to inform, convince, etc. So the only difference between a letter or an email, and look at the spelling, the way it is written, email, you write e-mail together. You don't need a hyphen, etc. anymore, and that happens to be the most acceptable form of writing email. So the only difference is that it is electronic. So it's an electronic message, and apart from it, there are certain advantages that come with it. You notice, unlike a letter, it is inexpensive. In a letter, you type, you courier or post, and then it takes time, and then you wait for a response. So because of this electronic nature, it has taken care of all those issues and concerns. So it's an electronic message that is inexpensive, quick, and convenient. Okay, so the main focus would obviously be on writing effective emails. So just like a letter, before you write, you were supposed to sit down and think of certain things. In email, there is an additional layer that you have. Number one, you writing an email, why don't you think of, is this truly the correct person to contact? You want some information, why not put in that effort to get in touch with the right person? And when you write the email, what exactly it is that you want to achieve through that. So I think these are things which are common between an email and a letter. But it is this third thing where you would like to think over it a little more. The conversation that you want to have, is it better to talk about it in person or maybe over the phone? So can you think of something where it is better to discuss it in person than over an email? There is this one very odd thing that comes to my mind. Now, there are times when you are unhappy with someone. Now, the problem is that you could be unhappy, but you're still being polite and respectful. When we talk to person, our message is conveyed using three distinct things. Your message would typically have the language that you use, but apart from the language, people are also able to see your gesture, your eyes, your facial expression, so the body language that you have, and apart from that, the voice in which you deliver. So the trouble is, the moment you choose to write an email, you have the language, but you do not have the body language or the voice, and therefore at times the nuances go missing, and the language at times may make the other person feel that you were being harsher than what you were actually. So whenever you want to discuss some things where you believe that you're not happy about exactly, it's better to discuss in person. And if not in person, then you can at least pick up the phone, because in a phone you getting the language and the voice. The only thing that you're missing out on is the body language. Better, and your intentions are going to be more truly reflected. But if it is something that does not involve those things, what if you're simply passing on some information, or what if you want to have some sort of record, then it's better to write an email. At the same time, if it's a topic that will require a lot of to and fro communication, you pitching some ideas, expect the input about those, and then you need to contribute happen between the two. It's again not going to be an ideal tool. Okay, so typically when you sit down to write an email, the very first thing that you see on the screen is that bar in which you're supposed to input the address. So make sure that you use the right contact address. So very often we have seen that even some tiny errors, tiny mistakes can lead to big problems. And my suggestion, my recommendation will be that type in the address last. Take care of everything else before you come here. And the reason is, there are times when we accidentally send it without being complete, without adding everything that we wanted to add. So it will save you a lot of heartburn, a lot of unnecessary follow-up emails if you type it the last. So after the address, you have a subject line. And just like a letter, we know that a subject line is supposed to be clear. It should give adequate description and it should highlight the most critical part of the message so that the other person knows what you're talking about. So we looked at some examples while writing letters. Let's look at some more. Now in emails, at times we tend to be informal. Now tell me, have you ever received an email where the subject was just a hi? What is that? What does that tell me about the email at all? Or the subject line simply says questions, but you notice questions about what? Are you going to ask me about the weather? A review of some movie that I watched, some professional information? What? Similarly, meeting, where, when, why, which department, what was the agenda of that meeting. At least add those things. And then, one more thing. In connection to what? And what are all these dots doing here? Some thoughts on what? These are very, very lousy ways of creating or constructing your subject line. So put in some effort and make sure that you go ahead and pick it and talk about the right subject line. So here are some more examples. Now let's look at the very first line. Party planning meeting rescheduled for 3 p.m. You notice it gives us all the critical information that we needed. Sorry, I think we need to go back. So it gives you all the critical information that you need. So you know that it is about a meeting that was called for planning a party and it has been rescheduled and the time. Now the mail can fill me on the details, why it has been rescheduled or if there is any addition, deletion from the agenda. But all the critical information is here. Okay. Then the other one very clearly tells me that the other person needs my help. Help over what? Finding the Smith paper. So I can straight away figure out whether it is something that concerns me or not, or is a high priority thing for me or not. Once again, the other one very clearly says that it is a reminder. And reminder about what? See? Then it does not just say questions about some specific project. Congratulations, right? So that is what we mean. Concise, to the point, gives you all the critical information, and that is how you would like to think it over. And it pays a lot to write down exactly what you need. So if you need help, type help. If on the other hand, if it is something that you believe the other person should know, although you do not need any action from that person, you can always write it as FYI, the policy changes, the policy change in recruitment. Right. So the other person knows that no action is needed, but the sender felt that it is something that I or the recipient should be aware of. Right. And then there is this one more thing. There are times when you feel that you need to change the subject line. So you're replying, but you needed to change the subject line. For instance, the person actually chose a very lousy subject line. Please help with this. Now, when you hit the reply button after reading the email, you know, it will once again, the subject line will be, please help me with this. So because the original sender has used a lousy subject line, does not mean that you need to stick with it throughout. Change it, and when you change it, write the correct subject line. And in these brackets, in these parentheses, you can add the original line as well, so that the other person knows it's a reply to which particular email. So that fixes the problem politely without affecting the other person's ability to recall that email. And in the same vein, I'll take you through one more important thing. So you notice in this particular email, there has been a lot of to and fro happening. So somebody sent a reminder, which someone else forwarded it again, and there were these reply happening on that email. Sometimes makes it very cumbersome to follow the thread, the entire thread. So what should you do? Remove these extra email prefixes. How about getting rid of all of these? So simply retain reply reminder and then the rest of the information. Because the problem is, you notice a lot of people nowadays access the emails on their phone, and the screen of a phone, in fact I have one right here, see, unlike a computer, the screen of a phone is so small that such a long subject, that a subject line with all these extra bits will ensure that the actual subject line is not even visible easily, and that defeats the entire purpose. So remove all these extra prefixes wherever possible, wherever not needed, and that will help you remain highly effective while creating the subject lines. Okay, so after the subject line comes the body of your email, and obviously you're supposed to organize your email, and typically we know it has introduction followed by a body which contains the discussion of your agenda and then a conclusion. And in this entire process, do not be afraid of highlighting, right? On a piece of paper, you would normally not be able to highlight things easily, but in an email you can engage in formatting tools. You can put something in bold, you can underline something, and you can also make something in a different color, and that can make the relevant parts stand out and be easy to refer to or access. So whenever you're there, when you start or end, always be polite, be brief. In fact, in a letter, we obviously like to be concise, but even if you're not very concise, it's okay. But when it comes to an email, you would strive to be as clear as you possibly can. Keep them short, and I don't know why, but a lot of people while writing emails somehow think that they do not need paragraphs. But please make sure that you always use paragraphs for any email which is reasonably long. At least have an introduction, a body and a close. and do not allow your paragraphs to be more than 5 sentences long while writing an email. Otherwise, the chunk will be too big to handle. So, this 5 sentence each here is not a prescription that says that you must have 5 sentences. It basically says at the most put in 5 sentences in each one of those paragraphs. Do not go beyond that. And thereafter, provide important dates or references within the email. So, if you are referring to a telephonic conversation, mention it. You are referring to some previous proposal, letter, meeting, once again mention it there. And put each action or point on its own line. So, you are talking about different things that you are trying to achieve. Make sure that they are separate or segregated. I think the example here will help you see that how. So, the question is, if you are writing say directions, you want to emphasize, you can use a list itemization, remember, or bullet points. See. So, in the first case, we are using a list. Step 1, step 2, or in the other case, you are listing down the various things that you want to achieve. So, improve customer satisfaction, empower employees, makes it concise, and then introduces a lot of white space around. We are also using color to highlight these things, and all of that can on the whole bring about a much better desired change in the overall experience of the reader. So, here is an example of an email that I am warning you is very poorly written. So, here please read it and let me know what all can we say is wrong about this mail. So, in case you are not through, let us check. Number 1, look at this, hey. Number 2, I was just thinking about the meeting we had about the new workshop you were planning for next week about resume writing. Look at how convoluted this sentence is. Moreover, what is this? I was thinking about the meeting. Why can't you put it in the subject line maybe and then reference to it here? A very convoluted sentence. I think we may have forgotten to include all of the students who might benefit from this workshop. Now, that is a fair point, but then you notice that there is another sentence which should ideally have been connected with this point, but is languishing down below. Then it mentions a specific point. You notice that there is no comma after, of course, here. Then another irrelevant, another related point. I can then send the, so and then the person is not even ending with an action expected. So, no paragraphs, informal language, scattered thoughts, poor punctuation, all of this reduces the effectiveness of this particular email. On the other hand, let us look at another one. Now, we have just reframed the previous email and then see what happens. So, look at the start now. Could you send me a list of the students included in the resume writing workshop by tomorrow? So, right in the very first sentence we are on the ball, right? So, we are giving a very crisp summary of what is it that the email is about and what is it that we expect. Now, why do we need that? So, in the previous slide, and I'll take you to that. Look at this here. There are a lot of U's, right? On the other hand, this uses a lot of V's. No accusation anywhere. All that it says is that we may have forgotten, and that too we and not you. There are several groups of students that were not on your list. In fact, even this your, if we convert into R, will be probably even more polite, and thereafter. And once again, you notice that we are ending with, and we are thanking that person in anticipation and then closing that. So, a much better way of constructing an email as compared to the previous one. And then after your body, you have a signature. Make sure that it is appropriate, brief, and provides all your contact information. A lot of people tend to at times add some funny things here, and that is what I meant by appropriate. If it's a professional email, make sure that you do not add anything which is funny or humorous. All the laws governing confidentiality, legalities also equally apply to emails, so make sure that you do not divulge anything which is unnecessary and it contains all the relevant legal warnings, and should look professional. So, here is a format that I thought I'll run you through. So, let's just go through this together. So, you start with addressing the person. So, you notice you can use dear, or you can simply write the full name. Proceed. So, put a prefix and then write the name. Sorry, in this case you won't have a professor, but then you can put in Professor Kim Yong, right? In American English, we know that we put a semicolon. In British, you can also put in a comma, right? Or you can also write this. And these days, punctuations is getting simplified. So, if you're not writing the colon or a comma, then usually it is acceptable. So, your body, then you have once again sincerely yours truly. I'd run you through a detailed version where we looked at the American way and the British way and the differences in terms of how these expressions can be formal or informal. So, you can use all that understanding here and create this, and then finally especially look at this part here. There are no commas between titles and the end of the signature line. So, you don't really need that comma. And then look at this particular part too. The name should be on the next line, or you can skip one line. So, you can have, you'd likely to have some gap here. And in case it's a business letter, and not an email, then you know that this gap is obviously going to be larger, so that you can go ahead and put in your signature here very clearly. So, that's a typical format that one can follow while writing emails. Then your email may also have some attachments. So, in case you're using any attachment for business emails, it is a good idea to write attachments, and then you specifically mention the name of the file and the program or the software that the file was built in. There are times that we use some specialized software. This point becomes very critical here. So, you notice that you have the name lab file, and it talks about the software along with its version or variant. In fact, we struggled a lot for a couple of years during presentations, because a lot of people used PowerPoint 2007, and the animations could not be ported to the higher versions, or use the higher versions and expected them to run on the lower version, then we had that issue for quite a brief while. So it's always a good idea to mention this about your attachments there. Okay, and then there are times when you're writing a long email. So if the email for some reason is getting long, do take some extra precautions, do follow through some extra steps. So number one, create an elevator summary. You know, the very first paragraph should contain the gist of everything that you wanted to say. Now, why do we call it elevator summary? Elevator is the American English for what we here call a lift. Now, imagine if you were riding with me in a lift from maybe, you know, if you were riding for some 5-6 floors, then that will probably give you some 10-20 seconds with me. So an elevator summary is something that can be conveyed within those 10 to 20 seconds. So you can start with the elevator summary. Do include a table of contents, and then every item on that table of contents can become the heading for the subsequent sections. And in case you need a response, please make sure that you mention that in the very first paragraph. And the reason is, it's a long email, right? You've heard of this syndrome that a lot of people nowadays are affected by. It's called TLDR, too long, did not read. So the person may not have read through to the very end, and therefore make sure that you put that in the first paragraph itself, so the reader knows what is expected from him with respect to that specific email. So here is an example for you. So it's going to be a long email, but the summary is right here. Our profit margin for the last quarter went down 5%. As a result, I am proposing budget adjustments for the following areas. Now that is followed by a table of contents. So this email contains A, B, C and D, and each one of these A, B, C and D can go on to become a separate heading in their own right. So A, B, C and D can go on to become a separate heading in their own right. And then let's give some extra input to writing a complaint. It is something that has to be done very sensitively. I focused on that. I emphasized this point even during our session on writing a letter. So number one, briefly state the history of the problem. Say you bought a phone. Talk about when the phone was bought, when the first problem occurred, and then talk about what you did to get it fixed in the past. So you can mention the previous 2-3 interactions instances, after which talk about why it is necessary for you to take care of this problem. No blame game, no accusations, nothing of that sorts. Why is it needed or necessary for you to create it? And then offer your suggestions on how it can be resolved or how you are willing to help in the matter. Don't forget to include it. So talk about what you think can be done or should be done, and in which ways can you get involved with that solution here as well. So do write that, and that will ensure that the email remains ideally the kind of email that nobody is threatened by, and your probability of getting a response from the others is going to be many fold if you follow this particular method. So that's about writing, the gist of writing emails. And now let me also take you through the chapter. So it will help us revise whatever we have done and then deal with it. So you notice even here we are talking about just